Hey everyone, in this video we just wanted to talk to you very briefly about the underappreciated role of trauma in sabotaging your eating and potentially a lot of other things in your life. It really comes down to the fact that we have two types of memory. One of them is explicit memory, and this is like the memory related to everything that lets you visualize ideas, concepts, things, and kind of have a tangent idea of them. And implicit memory is all of the memories that hit us on an unconscious level, where you're not really able to like visualize it and make images of it, but it still affects everything you do. And that's where trauma is stored.
It's the subconscious memory. That's where most people refer to it.
Yeah.
Some researchers like to call it unconscious, but I think that's dumb.
Yeah, it's kind of like,
I think subconscious is more of an accurate verbal description of it.
It's kind of like an undercurrent that affects your behavior and your thoughts without you really knowing that it's there doing it. So what are some of the ways that trauma can show its head and impact people? Does it have to do with like the lizard brain? Does it have to do with the frontal cortex? How does it play that role?
So I'm going to link a blog that describes it in greater details, but I'm going to be brief here. Say you were sexually molested as a child. You go into fight or flight, which is your lizard brain. And then those memories get stored in there. And most kids, when trauma happens to them, they are soothed with food, either by their parents or themselves, because they don't use drugs yet or alcohol, right? And so they reach for food. So it gets stored in the memory that every time that anything that initiates that kind of feeling of trauma, you reach for food, like subconsciously, like not even, it's the autopilot, like when you're reaching for that brownie and you don't realize why you're doing it. It's usually because it is stored in your subconscious as a trauma.
Okay. So I guess one of the questions that I have that comes to mind about this is, if we understand that it is playing a role behind the curtain, pulling the strings on your, metaphorical puppet body, and that it gets often developed during childhood from childhood traumas, then what are like some of the triggers that would have you reach for that? Like playing on your example of
any level of stress at that point, like it depends on what you went into sometimes during trauma. And like I said, it explains it in great detail in the blog. But in some trauma, we go into a freeze state, and some we go into fight or flight. So it depends on how our subconscious like connects these things. So say it's more anxiety provoking.
Okay.
Then your brain will immediately go to whatever was self-soothing at that time.
Yeah, okay.
It's like a habit in your subconscious, though.
Yeah, okay.
So it's not a conscious habit.
And so then that's why certain behaviors like going for these foods helps alleviate the stress.
The perceived stress, yeah.
Is because that's built into their subconscious as the requirement for self-soothing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So is this something where you really need to like get into psychology and deal with the trauma in order to overcome it? Or
I didn't find it helpful. Talk therapy, I think, is ridiculous and does not help most people. It does help some, but it doesn't help most people. I like EFT, which I will link a source in the blog too for how to learn how to do it. EMDR is another one that's goes with your eye movements, and it desensitizes you to stimulus. Somatic experiencing, you do have to find a practitioner for that, but that's one of my favorites too, because it connects your mind body together, and certain experiences, like I explain it in great detail in the blog though.
Okay, cool.
But that's how you deal with that kind of trauma.
Yeah.
And just a lot of these things manifest as addictions too later when people want more control around their foods. They decide they want a diet, and so they reach for substances to quell that like anxiety and the trauma. And so if you want to get rid of all of your like self-soothing, that where you reach outside of yourself, then you have to address the underlying trauma, or it's always going to be bubbling under there.
Okay.
And dictating your behaviors.
Cool. Very informative. Anything else that you wanted to add into this one?
No, just I have a real huge problem with people judging other people for self-soothing because we don't know what kind of trauma they experienced in childhood. And so for you to judge someone for eating too much or failing at their diet constantly, like you just don't understand the big picture. And so we can't judge people for soothing something they don't even understand.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Okay, awesome. If you found this information helpful, then that's awesome. That's what we're trying to do. And if you know someone who you think this information could help, then please share it with them.